I was doing my bills the other day, which is not just done with my checkbook anymore, but a lot of it's done on my computer. Anyway, I was doing that, and it's always amazing when you sit down to pay your bills. You realize, wow, there is a lot going out, and it got me thinking about this other article that I had read not long before that, just a couple weeks ago. And this article was the headline was wealth and unhappiness. And what this was, it was generally looking at the country, our country, and it was comparing our wealth with our level of unhappiness that seems to be expressed. And what this article talked about was that the United States is among the top in terms of wealth. That if you look at the factors of wealth, we are at the top of all these countries. But we're closer to the bottom when it comes to issues of happiness or unhappiness. For example, it said between 1990 and 2022, total life satisfaction, whatever they used to determine that, but the total life satisfaction in that study showed a drop of by 5%. And life expectancy had dropped 10%. And depression had increased by 14%. And so this article went in, and I know there's probably lots and lots of factors of what goes into this, but this article looked at how in terms of our wealth, we're really high, but when it comes to satisfaction with life and our general health, we're so low. Why is that the case? Why or how is it possible that we could be among the most wealthy or the most wealthy and be closer to the bottom in terms of happiness? Well, if you look at Scripture, Jesus often talked about the relationship between wealth and happiness, or wealth and what we are called to be as faithful people. In fact, I know some folks have said Jesus talked more about money than about anything, which really isn't true. But Jesus does talk an awful lot about money and about wealth. And his basic conclusion is it can get in the way of faith, it can get in the way of happiness, it can get in the way of general life satisfaction. Why is that? Why is that? Well, perhaps it's because, as Jesus seems to imply, perhaps it's because we begin to put that as our God, wealth as our God, and that's always going to let us down. It's interesting. One of the most wealthy men to ever live, one of the most wealthy persons ever to live in terms of not just financial wealth, but also wisdom, was King Solomon. And it's believed that King Solomon wrote different portions of Scripture. It's believed that he wrote in his younger life the Song of Songs, or that portion of Scripture that reflected on kind of the joy and the passion of life. It's also reflected that maybe in the mid part of his life he wrote the Proverbs, but then towards the end of his life he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes, it's a really interesting book. It talks about how so much of life's pursuits is emptiness, meaningless, vanities. And in one section, in chapter 5, beginning at verse 10, he begins to look at this concept of wealth. Now, I actually like the New International Translation of this a little bit better than the one that I normally use. But this is what one of the wealthiest, richest persons to ever live, King Solomon, wrote in Ecclesiastes. He said, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. It too is meaningless. As goods increased, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. Now, you can debate that. You can say, well, no, that's not the way it really works. When I get to the end of writing my bills and there's still money in there, I'm happy. I'm satisfied. I'm good. Perhaps. But it's amazing to me that Solomon and then later Jesus seems to help us try to focus on the fact that if that's what our biggest concern is, if our biggest concern is over money and finances and wealth, we will never be satisfied. There will never be enough. Satisfaction comes from a very different source. And that source is tied into our faith and our recognition of the God who has given us everything. That's what true satisfaction is all about. So the statistics that this article talked about, I guess in the end they don't really surprise me that much. What I hope is that and maybe if you feeling like this is your journey too, that I need to begin to understand what's really going to be bringing me satisfaction in life. And I think a lot of that can be found right in this book.